Herta Oberheuser stands as a chilling figure, the sole woman among the infamous murdered doctors at the Nuremberg trials. Even 7 decades later, the sheer horror of her atrocities and monstrous experiments on human beings remains profoundly disturbing. Her name has become a lasting symbol of inhumanity and a particular brand of cruelty that seems beyond the capacity of a sound mind. Born in Cologne in 1911 to a working-class family, Herta Oberheuser defied her parents' financial limitations to pursue her medical ambitions. She juggled her studies at the medical university with work, diligently funding her own education. Even during her student years, her character and burgeoning political leanings began to surface. Driven by an intense focus on her future profession, she became a fervent supporter of Hitler's policies. Classmates recalled a peculiar strangeness in Gert, noting her pettiness, envy, and capacity for meanness. Furthermore, during her university practice, the future criminal readily engaged in experiments on animals, including invasive surgical procedures to study bodily functions and develop various therapeutic approaches. In 1937, Oberheuser earned her medical degree, joined the Physiological Institute in Bonn, and, as was mandatory for career advancement at the time, became a member of the National Socialist Party. 3 years later, by then a dermatologist, Herta spotted a newspaper advertisement seeking medical personnel for the Ravensbrück concentration camp and applied. Thus, in early 1941, she arrived at the largest Nazi women's concentration camp. By the end of the summer of 1941, horrific medical experiments on the imprisoned women and their children commenced in Ravensbrück. These experiments were directed by Karl Gebhardt and carried out by Herta Oberheuser and 2 male doctors. The latter reportedly attempted to avoid participating in the cruel procedures, leading Herta to frequently take on their tasks herself, seemingly with grim satisfaction. She was also involved in selecting prisoners for the experiments, assisting during surgical interventions, and meticulously observing the agonizing results. The majority of the experiments in the camp aimed to study the human body's vital functions under extreme duress. To this end, doctors artificially induced various conditions that might arise during military operations: wounds, frostbite, burns, hypothermia, and specific injuries. Experimental drugs were then tested on the prisoners to treat these deliberately inflicted conditions. Tragically, almost all of these experiments ended in the victims' deaths. The Nuremberg trial records contain evidence indicating that Herta Oberheuser viewed the prisoners as mere guinea pigs, devoid of human dignity. Soon, experiments involving sulfonamide began in the concentration camp, investigating its effects on wounds. Subjects were deliberately wounded, and foreign objects like nails, dirt, and glass were inserted into the wounds. The drugs under study were then applied, and the victim's suffering was closely monitored. Unsurprisingly, few of the already weakened and emaciated captives survived such brutal interventions. Herta Oberheuser also participated in bone and muscle tissue transplantation and late-term abortions. She continued her work in the camp until the summer of 1943, and the horrific experiments persisted until the fall of the Nazi regime. In 1946, Oberheuser stood as the only female doctor among the accused at the Nuremberg trials. In her defense, she argued that she was merely following orders, asserting that a woman, in her view, was incapable of such terrible crimes. Furthermore, Herta claimed that participation in these sinister experiments, should a prisoner survive, was their only chance of escaping the horrors of the camp. Found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity, the court sentenced Oberheuser to 20 years in prison. However, on January 31st, 1951, her sentence was reduced to 10 years, and on April 4th, 1952, she was released early. After her release, she worked as a doctor in Stocksy and concurrently at the Ionanto Hospital. In 1956, she was recognized by a former prisoner of Ravensbrück, leading to her dismissal from the Iowa Anatov Hospital. Following her dismissal from hospital institutions, she opened a private medical practice. However, persistent protests against her past forced her to cease her medical activities. In 1965, she relocated to Bad Honnef. Herta Oberheuser died on January 24, 1978, in the nearby town of Linz am Rhein.